Okay, let's start. In MDI 1, we were talking about. Can you hear my voice? Can you see the PPT?
Very much so.
Okay. So, what we were talking about earlier was the fact that the only constant in the history of humankind is migration. People migrate all the time. But what happened was when the study of migration and diaspora started, uh, most of the early scholars looked at migration from a male perspective. It was a very stereotypical way to think about the fact that if people are migrating because of work, then it's only men who work. Women were absolutely ignored. Women were looked at only as spouses who would join the men wherever they will go. And interestingly, irrespective of the fact that the scholars and everybody knows the fact that 50%, almost about 50% of the world are women, the focus was still on men. Now, interestingly, the way men look at things and the way women looks at things are totally different. The problems faced by men are different. The problems faced by women are different. The experiences of men and women are different, and yet the study of migration and the study of diaspora focused on men. I was just thinking, randomly this thought crossed my mind that when the slave trade happened, where slaves from Africa were taken to the Americas, it was assumed the fact that they needed, bodies to do work on various plantation and etc. And it had to be men. So where did the women come from? Where did black women come in America? Or the fact is, when we talked about indentured labor in India being taken to plantations in Fiji, Trinidad, Tobago, South Africa, and so on and so forth, it was assumed the fact that you need hardy men to work in the fields. But wait, how did the women come there? Now, the interesting part is obviously there would be women who also will be traveling. In fact, I read this novel called Jahajin on indentured labor, where there were single women who were traveling, women whose husband had deserted them, or otherwise young girls. They were traveling. So these women were there, a part of it, and almost about 40%. So it was much later that scholars trained their focus on the fact that women also become a part of the migration scenario. Then there was this issue about sex and gender. In fact, in the last class, we talked about how sex and gender differ. Sex is more associated with the biological, biological, organs or biological association of a human being, where gender is a cultural role. So let's look at this unit 68 and 69. I've clubbed it together about how feminization of migration happened. In fact, as globalization increased, as communication and transportation, the communication became better, transportation became faster. We had a large amount of single women, girls who moved for education, who moved as tourists, who moved for work, and the term feminization of migration. In fact, feminization of migration is a keyword that you should use whenever we are talking about gender and diaspora. So let's understand, we will understand concept of feminization of migration, vulnerabilities and exploitations by women migrant workers, legal provisions. So something about legal provisions I will talk about. The rest of it you can study in the SLM. Major developments in international migrants, rising number of women migrants, growth of women-centric occupation. We are also in the afternoon session talked about how economics is directly related to politics, or how politics is directly related to economics. As women became economically independent, they started to move, and inevitably the politics which is driven by male patriarchy do not want such things to happen. So, how these forces of politics and economics, negotiate with each other. Growth of women-centric occupations, migration of women in independent capacity, women-related legislations, growth of gendered perspective on various issues. So even when a organization or a state or even a family talks about the fact, in fact, this is what we were talking last time, when the society talks about the fact that women should not, move out in the evening or in the dark, the society or the government or the way the policy is structured does not talk about public spaces being made more women friendly or public spaces being made more disabled friendly or being made more older friendly. They want to do restrictive policy and say don't go out. Now anytime there is a don't, it's a restrictive policy. So how these policies worked, how they changed. Background, global estimates female migrants comprise about 135 million or 48.1% in 2020. ILO, there were about 66.6 million or 44.3% female international migrant workers in 2013. It's a very old figure. In fact, we need to cross check what are the latest figures. Some of the figures in your SLMs are older because these units were written older. So you can always Google search. Again, go to sites like IOM or UNDESA, which will give you exact figures. Whenever you see a figure, please cross verify, lest you pick up a wrong figure. Term feminization of migration associated with the phenomena where women migrate for an economic activity rather than just to join a male member. Women historically have been moving. Again, as I said, that's because the focus of study of most of the scholars have been men. Women have been ignored or their experiences have not been counted. Only now is that scholars have started looking at that. Occurrence result of many factors. Increase in the demand for female labor. Millions of women from developing or underdeveloped countries are migrating as care workers. As the Western societies and the industrial societies, as their education levels increased, as women entered their workforce, the fertility rate or the number of children produced reduced. When number of children produced reduced, the number of new people or younger people adding to the workforce reduced. Now, when women are working, you need somebody to look after children, you need somebody to look after the home. As younger people reduced in the society and older people increased, the caregiving increased. Now, somebody had to step in for this caregiving. Typically, that was the labor which came from the global south. Last class, we had also talked about the global south and the global north. Global north typically is not the physical north, but represents the countries which are high on the industrial scale, high on the per capita scale, high on the GDP scale, and the rest of the countries are global south. Another difference is more often than not, global north are the ones which colonize the global south. Okay. Change in global economy, impact of neoliberal policies, series of migration challenges, large scale privatization, which we talked about in global south, change in social structure. And remember, every change affects every other part of society. So if a male migrate, it affects the family in a particular way. If a female migrates, it affects the family in a particular way. If everybody migrates, it affects the families in a particular way. It affects the host economy, it affects the home economy, it affects the culture, it affects the social structures. A simple thing like when a male or a female migrate and come back, they will bring some new ideas in terms of culture, in terms of structure, what they see. That brings tensions in the community back home. There is a tension in the community in the host land because of change in demographic. Immigrants bring in their own culture and so on and so forth. Increase the gap between rich and poor. Increase in informal economy has provided the space where a large number of women enter workforce. Because, and why is this? Because informal economy means there is no welfare guarantees. No welfare guarantees means you need more money for welfareism, in the sense that today, for example, in the absence of welfareism, you need to buy a Medicare, which is expensive. The poor people cannot buy Medicare. So obviously, and that is why in the lower class, both men and women are working. Often, women from developing countries migrate as workers to support their families, which is what we see in the in terms of the rural and urban areas. Trends, it is not a simple movement of females as a partner with their husband. Female migration becomes accounted for in early migration studies, as we is talking about. However, now there is more amount of studies on women, on gender, on female migration. That women generally get recruited in the professions that demand traditional gender roles, and the work is undervalued. Look at the fact how we undervalue a woman's role in a household. How the fact that today, in spite of a professional working woman, there are still demands on her after marriage to work in the house. So these the and it is not just in India. These are cultural based. These are across the world. It might be variations in terms of percentages, but it all depends on the culture of a community, a country, or whatever it is. For instance, in home care work and domestic work, labor takes place within the private house, and because it happens in private spaces, caregiving, those work is devalued or undervalued. Laws are not constructed because they are invisible. Look at the fact that when maids come to our house, they are almost invisible. This makes the sector largely unregulated, invisible, and more exploitative for the migrant women. Migrant has a double whammy because you are in an alien culture. You are in a country where you don't speak their language, you don't understand their culture, or you are a minority out there. Minorityism is a separate challenge in itself, and then you are exploited because in case you demand your rights, you look at the fact. And the very interesting part, major studies have shown that more often than not, it's the diaspora which tends to exploit their ethnic workers. We have had news of Hindujas exploiting their maid. They were arrested in Switzerland or somewhere. We had this Indian diplomat who was mistreating her maid when she was arrested in America. Their diasporas are notorious for exploiting their own ethnic brothers and sisters, when I say co-ethnic members. So these are the 20 corridors in 2020. This is UN DESA, Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And if you see the biggest map corridors, Philippines, Hong Kong, SAR China, Indonesia, Hong Kong, SAR China. And Philippines and Indonesia today is the largest number of female caregivers. Countries like Hong Kong, Japan, aging population, not enough replacement of younger people. They need caregivers. Philippines, Ukraine, Italy, India, Nepal, Malaysia, Bangladesh. Look at and these are female corridors. You can, check it out on the net. It is a UN DESA. So let's look at the occupational categories of these migrating women. Domestic work. There are estimated 67 million of domestic workers in the world. 80% are women. Low skilled, less educated women to get easy access to work. Now, as soon as they are low skilled and less educated and they need work, there is a side, note of, exploitative situation. In fact, a lot of these women get sucked into trafficking, where they are then exploited. It allows them to earn money and contribute to the family income. Remittance they send back home contribute to the development of the region. In fact, there is a case study of this Filipino women who go as care workers, how they affect the family, how it affects the community, what kind of effect it has on the children. Migrant domestic workers face many vulnerabilities, low wages or no wage, long hours of work, sexual exploitation, trafficking. Very few domestic workers are covered by general labor laws. Migrant domestic workers are subject to discrimination. Restriction on their movement also hampers their opportunity. So, anytime there is a restriction, remember we talked about mobility in the MDI 10 chapter in the unit, mobility becomes a very important thing. So, if you are restricting mobility, that hampers opportunity. And if there is an unequal mobility, that also affects people. So, for example, the Gulf countries follow something called a kafala system. In the kafala system, the individual or the company holds the sponsorship permit to employ foreign labor. So, they don't directly employ foreign labor, it goes through something like an intermediate contractor. Critics of the system have compared it with modern slavery. System is exploitative, more for women who may be forced to stay at sponsor's house and face sexual exploitation. Please also understand, again, in literature, sexual exploitation is typically associated with women. It's not that boys or men do not face sexual exploitation. You would have seen news items about how Palestinian prisoners are sexually exploited, male prisoners are sexually exploited in Israeli prisons. So, the only thing about men and boys, even when we go through the trafficking unit, we'll see that, it brings shame. So, those narrations or those stories do not come out. The absence of an advocate protection mechanism make these migrant workers more vulnerable. Isolation hinders access to accurate information. Invisible nature of work leads to violation of their human and labor rights. Caregiving, because it becomes private work, it becomes invisible because it is in a private space. And then something which is invisible, or when people in that industry cannot, unionize or come together to fight for their rights, inevitably will get exploited. And in the new situation of neoliberalism, uh, the word is the new liberalism, the fact is privatization actually leads to more exploitation. Uh, Caregiving services, healthcare workers today comes under professional services. Confidence and opportunities for new learning widens the scope of their employment, both at national and international level, and hospital-based care work. In fact, in India, the nursing profession was largely attributed to the Keralite women. Now, of course, most of the local nursing needs are being done by communities from across the country. The Keralite nurses are more, going outside internationally rather than domestic. Workers may face problems like domestic workers getting trapped in the hands of fake recruiting agents. Many have to pay extra fees to get opportunities to work abroad. They generally get hired through private agencies or informally to work in houses. Now, inevitably, whenever there is a private agency or a contractor, and unless there are legal provisions to govern these private agencies or contractors, and then there is some overview, the situation becomes exploitative. And that's one of the reasons why laws are made. The countries Organizations need to continuously see how the situation is changing, and the situation changes very fast. So, for example, concerted action on nursing scheme introduced in 2018 by German government, which identifies 5 areas for attracting and retaining nurses: higher pay, recruiting outside of the country, health promotion, additional training, nursing emphasize. So, and that is why migration governance becomes an important issue. We will study it in a couple of units, but we will also look at the fact that how migration governance falls short. Somewhere down the line, there is politics in it, there is a lack of intent, or there is not enough stakeholder involvement in migration government, leading to fuzzy policies which get rolled out, leading to problems. The shortage of nurses is recognized as a critical policy issue in comparison to the retaining of physicians. And inevitably, countries will do need to look out for what is available to them, what do they need, how do they need to retain professionals, skilled people, how do they need to continue. You look at the way that the world is moving today in terms of skills, in terms of understanding of skills, the way countries are vying with each other to attract skills. And if a country is not careful today, with globalization and improved communication and faster transportation, you will lose skills very fast, because you cannot retain. It's like a company which cannot retain its employees unless it is able to offer something more than the next company. So if the next company is able to offer, better job description, better salary, the employee will leave. And similarly with countries. So, for example, policies to protect women migrant workers in India. There is an Immigration Act 82 to regulate immigration of people from India, reducing fraud or exploitation of Indian workers recruited to work overseas, requires of the obtaining immigration clearance or POE clearance from the Office of Protector of Immigrants, Ministry of Overseas Affairs. This required only for people going to one of the 18 listed countries, and most of these 18 listed countries are in the Gulf Cooperation Council, because of the kafala system and so on and so forth. So there is something called an ECR passport, immigration check required if the application is not 10th pass or does not have a certificate of 10th pass. Now, these legal provisions have a two-way effect. So once you bring in a legal provision, you've also to consider the fact that if the legal provision is stringent or it involves too much of hassle, then a person who wishes to go out will take an illegal route. So remember, it's like, as a youngster yourself or as a young person in the house, whenever the parents would say no without explaining why or without following it, the young person will obviously do whatever is said not to be done. So, for example, Indians who want to travel to the US without, the requisition of a visa and all that stuff, used what is called a donkey route, where they travel from here to Nepal to UAE to South America through Mexico into the US. And once they reach there as an undocumented person, then somewhere down the line they get a job and get themselves documented or whatever it is. So one has to understand the fact that when you do so for example, if there is a law which says that you need, if you're not 10th pass, you need an ECR certificate, you need, a certificate from the parents or the spouse that they are willing to allow you to go. There is a possibility that that woman who's not 10th pass but is in dire need of a job to support a family will fall in the trap of an agent, which could lead to trafficking. In fact, there were this major news item of these women from Punjab who were trafficked to Oman and Iraq, and then they were sexually abused. The Indian government has recently reduced something called a Pravasi Bharatiya Bima Yojana, mandatory insurance scheme, safeguarding the interest of Indian immigrant. Now, also, we need to see how much these schemes or these policies work. So, unless studies are done and case studies are discussed and stakeholders are involved, the government might roll out a scheme which can actually act as a deterrent, or it might not be as effective as what the government thinks. The scheme initially launched in 2003, amended in 2006, 817, overarching objective of strengthening the coverage of immigrant workers. So again, as I said, policies, laws is a dual sword. It can, if it is not made using stakeholders, it can have detrimental effects. And also we need to look at the fact that it's something like traffic laws. So even if there are traffic laws, there are stringent punishment. If the punishments are too stringent, there will be a corruption which will happen. If it is too lenient, there is no oversee, there is no regulation, then there will be chaos either which way. The ILO guide states that its conventions and recommendations with regard to domestic worker, there is an ILO Domestic Work Convention 189 which came into force in 2013. Guys, I hope I'm not going too fast. Tasya, Manjari.
Sir,
Hello.
hello.
I hope I'm not going too fast.
It's okay.
It's okay is not a very. Am I going too fast?
Um, well, it's maybe we should get down a little. So
Okay, I'll slow down a little.
yeah, thank you.
Okay, but please say that. Please say that.
I'll do. Yeah, don't
Please don't
hesitate.
be politically right with me. We are in a and these are not typically in undergrad grad lectures.
Right,
These are that's why I said you can stop me at any moment of time
right.
to share some information or to put a concern or to ask question. So
Definitely.
in the absence of any feedback, then I continue in my normal pace.
I'll do that.
Okay.
I'll do. I'll
So
give.
there are these ILO conventions. Again, I don't think so. You don't, you need to remember all these conventions. You need to understand that ILO is the organization which looks after the labor. These are international conventions where member nation states get together and, agree on certain things in terms of this needs to be protected. Some policies need to be done. uh, now the thing with ILO and these international organizations is the fact when they come out with this convention, an international convention, these are broad guidelines. Then it depends on nation states to implement those guidelines in their national laws. And if the nation states do not do that, then ILO pretty much cannot do anything. It can press on the nations to follow these guidelines. There is a possibility, and today with globalization and every country trying to attract businesses to come to their country for employment, uh, you know a lot of these laws are papered over. The countries turn blind eyes to these laws. We've seen, for example, with Bangladesh wanting to get a lot of textile or textile work to their countries. Laws are overlooked. There have been fires in which thousands of people have died because base and one and this is how the global north colonize. It's a new colonization that push prices down so that the private contractors or the countries do not implement laws which leads to chaos, which leads to loss of life, and these companies and these countries go scot free. So, for example, I was seeing this. For example, even in the US, how Amazon does it is Amazon as a company, which is $1 billion or I think it's $1 billion company, much more, tens of billions of dollars of company. They will hire subcontractors. The parcel is Amazon, the delivery is Amazon, but these are subcontractors, and these subcontractors do not get the benefit of Amazon employees. And again, the New York mayor is coming out with these policies whereby these subcontractors are now being governed with the same way the Amazon workers are being governed. So the state needs to be careful, because if you are not careful in terms of labor laws, then it's a loss of economic opportunity. Because if the labor, a country like India may have excess of labor, but the fact is, to train a labor and then get a new labor itself is a cost. And now, as a part of the neoliberal package of capitalism, that's why they are wanting AI to come in, because that removes labor, because it removes laser labor. So all that money and that welfareism does not need to be given to AI. So it's a very interesting way the world is moving. Okay, coming back to ILO Convention 189 emphasizes on providing precise information of contract to the workers. So there are all these, 97 provisions concerning condition of work, social security of migrant workers. And we shall see during the unit that irrespective of all these, even in the US, during COVID, the people who were most affected were migrant workers. So a country which is at the foreground of democracy, where there is a federalism, where a lot of laws are actually operating, shows this, then you can understand how bad the situation would be in the global south. ILO Convention, What 43, migrant workers in irregular association, provides measures related to clandestine migration, issues related to irregular, ensures equal. So irrespective of the fact that it's an irregular migrant worker, that means the migrant worker is not documented and might have entered the country illegally. It still talks about the fact that that worker needs to have an equal treatment to the documented worker, which is a fair enough thing. Because at the end of the day, the worker might be undocumented, but it's still a human being. And if the story is about human beings, then how can an undocumented worker not have the same rights as a documented worker? Because documentation is just a political process. So let's look at some of the issues and challenges. Migration is a gender process, impacts women differently than men. Gender stereotyping limits women's autonomy and decision-making process, increasing vulnerability to systematic violence of human rights. Yet neither a gender-based approach nor a specific experience relating to migration are usually captured in migration law and policies. So inevitably, when a country or an organization or an international organization or even a company is making laws, for example, look at the sexual laws which even institutions are making, sexual harassment laws. How many women are consulted or women organizations are consulted before those sexual harassment laws are made? So inevitably, unless you are talking to the constituents. So for example, if you are making a law regarding domestic workers, unless there is a representation of domestic workers, how would you know what is there? For example, a IAS officer sitting in Delhi or Bombay is trying to, plan a road in rural Nasik or in Gurgaon. How would that guy or a lady officer know what is the condition? And that is one of the ways in which, when uh, in fact, the Global Compact on Migration talks about the fact that unless stakeholders are a part of your lawmaking process or the policy making process or the governance process, you will always have gaps because you will not even know what is happening. See, unless you cannot measure, how do you manage? Old saying, you need to measure to be able to manage. Like, for example, we talked about in the last week's class about migrant stock and migrant flow. Unless we know how many international migrants are there in a country, how, if we say that migrants are spoiling culture, or on what basis are we making those statements? Then it becomes a political rhetoric. Collecting and analyzing says disaggregated data is a critical step in developing effective gender responsive policy and laws that address migration unique impact on women and girls. Now that would require research, that would require academics, that would require it is a long winding process. Many bureaucracies across the world are very scared of these long winding processes. It's much easier to come up with rhetoric rather than evidence-based research. So that becomes an issue. Doing so is a human right imperative. Talk to organizations, talk to people about human rights. For example, in one of my class of undergrad students, a student asked me, but sir, these are prisoners. Why do they need human rights? So I answered them, but they are humans. So unless there is a talk, for example, if you look at your newspapers or your mainstream media of a week and see how many stories on migrants, on gender are coming out, you will be surprised to find almost nil. It was only during COVID that the whole country realized that metropolises are comprised of migrants. Then suddenly they were called migrants when a lockdown happened and there were no transport for going back. Then the whole country suddenly realized there were migrants within us, among us. And they needed to go back home. So a country imposed a lockdown without any evidence-based research. And then these guys had to just pretty much fend for themselves. When done right, it would ensure safe migration, prevent labor and human rights violations, save lives, promote gender inequality. And inevitably, if all this is done, the objective of policies is orderly, and orderly always benefits a society, a country, an economy, politics, and so on and so forth. So, as I said, all researches across the world have shown that migration is always better for the host society as well as home society. And migrants always contribute. In fact, migrants contribute more than the natives. So, for example, if you see, Bombay, Delhi, let's look at our own country. All migrants are contributing more to a city's GDP than the natives, because the number of migrants are more and they would like to save. They would like to, when you are actually contributing, the very process of existing in a day is contributing to the economy, because you buy stuff, you avail services, everything has a economic component. The outbreak of COVID-19 not only restricted movement of people, also made the situation more precarious for migrant workers. And in this, women had a double whammy, because the first people to let go were women. So now they were migrants and they had no jobs and they had no welfare, issues. And if you get stuck in an abusive relationship, domestic situation, then or an abusive office situation, then you are done. And IOM analysts in the US, immigrant women were among the group who faced the highest unemployment rates. Immigrant women in Canada had been adversely affected by pandemic in terms of layoff, decreased availability of short-term employments, and delayed careers. And mind you, these are the advanced economies. So if these are the advanced economies, you can imagine what would have happened in the global south. Immigrant women from Central and East Europe, most affected in countries like Norway, unemployment increased by more than 10 percent points. Many women migrant workers get isolated, trapped with abusers in their workplace or home because of pandemic-induced restriction in mobility. So there was this news items about how during demonetization in India, women faced a lot of abuse because women typically, especially those who were not economically independent but dependent on males, were saving money for household expenditure or other expenditure, not telling their husband. But when demonetization happened, they had to take out that money and give it to the husband, led to a lot of violence, domestic abuse. Lack of information, sometimes financial conditions force many women to choose the route of illegal migration. As I said, laws can be both ways. It's a double-edged sword. They also get caught in the hands of fake recruiting agents, take advantage of illiteracy and poverty, visit visas, illegality of documents, and illegal channels expose many women to trafficking and slave trade. And then once you are caught, then that's the end of you. It's a vicious cycle. And inevitably, traffickers we will see in MDI 9 and 10 when we talk about human trafficking, that conditions like poverty, unemployment, lack of opportunities are ripe conditions for recruitment into trafficking business. Almost half of migrants are women and children, increasing migrating alone or as heads of the household. Includes sexual exploitation, trafficking, and violence, double discrimination as women as migrants. Also, women do not stop getting pregnant when they are on the move. The childbearing and child raising is still a woman's job. So, obviously, in terms of migration policy, when you are going from a home country through a transit country to the end country, if a policy of the transit country is that there is no care help for a pregnant woman to deliver, you will see all those news items about women delivering on a train or on the outside a hospital or on the floor, is because the policies do not address such issues. Women and girl migrants are more likely to face health problems both in transit as well as destinations because the trauma is much more. You are again between men and women more often than not. When women are accompanying men, men would go for a job, so they are employed and their identity is based on an employment. Women are left in an alien environment, so the stress on them becomes much more. And then the expectation of carrying the culture and so on and so forth, typically deteriorates their mental and physical health. So, in terms of a case study in your SLM, there are case studies on the Filipino women. I'm picking up this Chinese diaspora formation, indentured labor, Portuguese imported Chinese labor from the settlement in Macau. The Chinese had migrated to Southeast Asia as traders, trade routes. Now, most of these traders were men, and most of these migrations were short term, who went for lucrative trade. There were others who settled down in some trading post. There was a term for these Chinese traders, they were called sojourners. Term coined by Ching Sui Ki Kuik. I don't know how to pronounce it. But temporary, it was only men who migrated to distant land. Women would remain at home tending to domestic duties. So now, when you're studying even men migration, the researchers are not looking at how it is affecting women and the household that is left behind. Because if you are studying migration, then the migration should study the complete aspect of migration in terms of the effects of male migration on the female, on the women, and the family. This was one of the distinctive features of gendered migration in old Chinese diaspora. So they were this women were tending to home, domestic duties, traditional patriarchal hierarchies. The new diaspora have made their host countries as permanent homes, with women either migrating with them or joining them later. New Chinese migrant continue to retain social, cultural, religious ties with mainland China, social networks within the overall communities. Each country today has something called Chinatown. The emergence of Chinatown, a cultural and commercial hub of Chinese people in places with they've settled down, is another striking feature of that ethnic community. In fact, we had a Chinatown in Calcutta. After the 62 war with China, things became bad in terms of the relation. So a lot of Chinese have moved to the West, leaving a lot of traditional Chinese business behind. And what you are seeing in terms of those who migrated to other countries were considered traitors. This actually was the case with a lot of countries. People who migrated from those countries were deemed as traitors. It was only with the concept of diaspora, transnationalism, and globalization did countries wake up to the aspect, including India, wake up to the aspect of the fact that these constituents in foreign lands were great assets, because they were not only remitting money for the home country's GDP, they were also a soft power in terms of lobbying, in terms of culture, in terms of skills, and so on and so forth. Part of 20th century, 20 to 49, one of the biggest migrations, Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, Malaysia. Large number of Chinese migrants were granting citizenship when Singapore and Malaysia became independent. In fact, Singapore and Malaysia have a very big Chinese community. They have equally a big Indian community. Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Indonesia, asymmetry of economic resources, Malaysia, Cambodia, they were anti-Chinese agitation, witnesses Malaysia and 16. So this is natural feature. Inevitably, you see a lot of anti-India hate now being generated in US and in Europe. Indians are doing economically very well. Obviously, when there is an asymmetric distribution of economic resources, jobs, and all that stuff, there are these tensions which, if not managed properly, or domestic politics, feeding into these tensions, will lead to consequences which become problematic. Also been classified based on their skills, nature. And we will see that in terms of all diasporas. When we study units on Indian diaspora, you will see that no diaspora is homogeneous. They are based in terms of skills. They are based in terms of, for example, Indian diaspora is based in terms of religion, caste, region, language. The Chinese merchants, skilled worker, Chinese coolies, Chinese sojourners, Huaran, ethnic overseas Chinese, Hawaiian, naturalized ethnic Chinese are terms used in Chinese. Particular form of gender migration, which is predominantly made, which is a repetition of the earlier slide. Chinese women were seen as independent workers, bread earners. Unlike Filipino women diaspora, who Filipinos dominate the nursing sectors. Chinese women migrants have joined multiple industries depending on their expertise and professions. Global distribution of capital, international division of labor, creating different patterns of migration. To US, Canada, Australia has created familial issues with the home countries that is challenging their role as passive members. So whenever this migration happens, it disturbs the traditional social structures, it disturbs the traditional political structures, it leads to tensions, which might lead to violence, It might lead to changes of the structures. We will see this across this whole course. Independence has challenged the traditional roles in an otherwise patriarchal society. China, like any Asian society, prefers male. Then they because of their population issue, they brought in a policy of a one-child norm. Then it came across that the Chinese couples were typically killing their daughters to have a male child. And now we are seeing that the Chinese population has slowed down and India has overtaken China in terms of the largest populous country. No longer seems to be influenced by patriarchal practice, which was earlier center of social relation. Everything is changing. France has one of the largest Chinese diaspora population, approximately 4 lakh. It was found that independence of women and their migration thwarted their passive and traditional role. So migration not only empowers women, so it's again a dual, a two-way, thing which works. It empowers on one hand, and secondly makes a female vulnerable. It depends on how does it work out. Arrived in France between 98 and 2000, belonged to certain provinces. China's economic stimuli, which led to transnational mobility, by their independent choices as autonomous migrants, were dependent on other external forces. So women, that's why the term feminization of migration, because women are now increasingly making choices of migrating for study, for work, and so on and so forth, disturbing traditional structures. So a 2016 protest that followed the murder of a Chinese worker in suburban of Paris. There's a sizable number of Chinese women to Middle East. They are not allowed to marry natives, subjected to discriminatory laws, earn less, and higher education qualification, which is a case with most of the migrants in Middle East. In entertainment, domestic service, and which is an euphemism for prostitution, not covered under labor laws, security system, in lawful work and later forced into the vulnerability then and in the absence of any regulation, in the absence of policy, or in the absence of home country having any focus on these migrants, leads to vulnerability and exploitation. Become the main driving force for transmission of Chinese culture, identifying and also participating in host country societies as part of the assimilation process. With the host country of second generation migration. Inevitably, the second generation is much more integrated into a host country than the first generation, which is obvious because the first generation still clings back to the host, to the homeland. The second generation born out there and go through the education system is more integrated. 80% of the respondents who were married in China were divorced and with adolescents or young adults. And inevitably, when you come from a traditional family and you go into a new culture where there are different standards, unless both partners are able to adjust to that culture, it will lead to a divorce. Constraints that limit opportunity is social and gendered conventions. In patriarchal settings, for example, in Niger, demand a nice wife stay at home and women do not travel. You will hear something similar in, let's say, in India, something in China. Each society has its own form of patriarchy. More matrilocal cultures such as Nicaragua, Dominican Republic had greater female migration rates far exceeding male migration rates regardless of marital status. So it again depends on societies, but you will see some very similar trends across countries. So it is social and gender conventions could acclimatate to host local standards, reinforce some of the traditional standards. So it also can be that migration to a new society can cocoon you into your own traditional culture. You you just do not assimilate or integrate, and leads to a lot of animosity. There is also a possibility that you shed your home culture and pick up the Western culture. For example, when we see uh, in a lot of Indian metropolis, a lot of people start mimicking a Western culture, leading to then blowbacks in terms of politics. For example, the later the newly celebrating of Halloween Day in cities across the country. So how this, and this is typically a trend of globalization, where young couples or children who are studying in abroad or private schools then get this information or content from outside. They find it cool, they start mimicking it. Men who migrated first to US were more inclined to help with domestic responsibility when boys joined later. And if it's the reverse case, the men's have a problem. Migration may result in even rigid gender roles in order to maintain societal norm that seems to be under threat. So again, these are specific case studies. For males, the shift in the responsibility or their failure to adapt or adequately care for the family in a new may exacerbate their desire to retain conventional patriarchy roles, which may result in violence against their wives and children. Leads to frustration. There are many case studies. There is a case study of these Keralite nurses who went to Germany, later got married. The men from Kerala went out there, led to violence because the men could not adjust to an independent wife, and so on and so forth. When spouses move, female-headed households may have limited access to resources in home countries. Despite women's increasing home power, migration had little effect on women's social position. Rather than responsibility grew, and women battled with separation. So, unless a migration study involves the complete aspect of migration, then it becomes a skewed study. Who move for family reasons have the lowest labor force participation rates. For example, they may have difficulty finding employment opportunity that match their talent. So if a female goes as a spouse, more often than not, her labor force participation rates are less, because she will not get a particular role. A foreign culture requires a different kind of understanding. The males are able to accommodate faster, because if they have gone with a job, they incorporate. For female to find a job in a new culture, in an alien place, becomes that much more difficult. Are often underemployed or working in jobs below their abilities. 70% of the Peruvian domestic workers in Chile have a high school or university education, but they are working as domestic workers. Migrants have difficulty establishing respect for their professional qualification and competence overseas, as well as experience linguistic, racial, and cultural handles and prejudices. May be harmed by gender discrimination or xenophobia. Double prejudice as women and migrants. So, women have this additional limitations. Reliance on gender norms or preconceptions in destined country may result in skill abuse, gender-specific hiring, or discrimination. For example, in countries like US, still the women in the similar job would earn less than the male. Native women. So migrant will obviously be at a disadvantage. Encounter prejudice on the basis of gender, may often earn less than males, more likely to face wage delays, incomplete payment, or inability to access their salaries. So let's sum up. There's an empowerment and vulnerability associated with professional women or skilled women, not professional, just professional, skilled women workers engage with. Some challenges need to be tackled to protect the women migration from exploitation. Unique features of Chinese and Filipinos diaspora. Chinese outmigration is 5 centuries old. Filipino diaspora is more recent. Even though I didn't cover Filipino diaspora, it's a part of your SLM. Sojourning is unique to Chinese diaspora. Film is characterized by, in fact, Filipino is more state-sponsored. The Philippines has made migration a state-sponsored policy. They train their migrating people into migration, into various aspects of it, because a large part of their Philippines economy is based on this migration. There are some references and suggested readings. You can read that. You can, if you Google on, papers on Chinese diaspora or Chinese women diaspora or Filipino women's diaspora, you will come across, scholarly articles. Okay. I have come to an end. Any questions? Let me switch on my video. Hi,
So
Sasya.
happy you again. Two things that were interesting. That was the donkey route that the Indians take to go to the US. Although that's quite interesting how they already know that people suffer through the process, and also the future is not great over there, but that still is happening. That struck me like really, why does that still happen, and what measures are these governments taking? One measure I heard was that the Mexico, where the borders happen, that's the end point. There they have an eye on Indians, especially because culturally we are kind of similar. But the way we function may be different or something. But yeah, if there are any measures taken is one thing. Second thing is that the Asian diaspora in India, quite interesting that there are some people who are coming here for jobs and then vice versa. Also, the schools are offering, Thailand and Indonesia. There is this program called Dharma Siswa in Indonesia, which wants others to know their culture and all. Even in India, I mean, so the countries are also pushing that way, that their culture, and there is an exchange of culture, and it's not a culture shock at the end when people go or know about the other country. Only when we do the stereotypes come down a little bit. But yeah, so these are my observations.
So, Sasya, we will talk about the culture and how this cultural transmission happens in terms of women or in terms of individuals or families. It's a separate unit. The
Right.
cultural continuity in terms of countries now pushing cultures, because each country has realized the use of diaspora in its affairs, in terms of spreading its culture, in terms of getting other people to know. Remember, diaspora becomes a great a marketing tool for a country to talk about itself.
Right.
So that's a separate unit that we will be talking about. Regarding the donkey route, please understand the donkey comes from the Punjabi word
Right.
donkey.
Yeah.
Remember, there always is a disparity in terms of economic condition of people in a particular place vis-a-vis another place. Every human being wants to do better.
Right.
Human beings work with hope. So,
Right.
irrespective of the hardship, there is a hope. And then there are these people who get trapped. So you are told that there are a lot of Indian professionals who get trapped in trafficking on the Thailand Cambodia border because
Mm.
they have they are professionals, there is no work in India. Agents tell them there is amazing work, you will get these many dollars, and then they by deceit are taken into a traffic situation, and then they work in these border companies where there is no regulation or legal thing, and they do scamming.
Right.
So inevitably we need to understand there is parallel, and understand governments have shortages in terms of staff, in terms of capabilities. Governments also deal with politics. So for example, US, the amount of money it is spending in trying to prevent immigration, if they were to pump in that money into the global south to create employment,
That would have
but
reduced. That
but
would reduce. Yeah.
but that's a difficult process. Politics becomes an easy process.
Right.
You look at the fact, for all that woes that we have in our cities, our rural areas still do not have work.
Right.
And irrespective of all the political rhetoric, because of lack of work, people will travel to the city,
Yeah.
collapsing the infrastructure.
Mhm.
So, these things need to be looked at in a larger plane, but, we know the limitations of governments, bureaucracy, and then the tactical politics which are at play by politicians leads to all of us in misery in the world.
Yeah. The concept that you have discussed about how illegal migrant is a very political angle taken. I mean, the connotation, political connotation, there's the is quite interesting, and I want to read up. And the second interesting thing I found today is that you were reading Peggy Mohan, or you have read Peggy
I
Mohan,
have read Peggy Mohan.
all of her works. So how is
All
it?
no, no, I just read her novel Jahajin.
The other two books are also quite interesting because they also deal with migration and how languages change and how we food changes or something like that.
If
It's
you have a PDF version, you can send it to me.
kindly text me. You have my number. Text me
Uh,
your
I
address.
I don't have your number, but if you send me a hello,
I will
I will. I'm typing my email ID also.
send it to me.
So if you have a PDF version, send it to me so that I can read it.
Yeah,
I,
I'll.
I Somebody sent me the Jahajin version, so I read it cover to cover. It was very
Okay.
interesting.
Mhm.
Considering the fact that how the gender inevitably, unless we get multiple perspectives, we are
Right.
stuck with our own perspective of whatever information that we have. And that
Yeah.
information is never complete without multiple perspectives.
Right.
And that is why it is very important in academics. It's all about multiple perspectives. There's nothing right, wrong in academics. It's all about perspectives. Whichever angle you're looking at, you will see, a different aspect to the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
Manjari, any question? Okay, I think she's with it. Okay, anything else, Sasa? Sasya.
Pretty much that, but I wanted to ask you about the system, the IGNO, um, assignment stuff.
Huh.
So, so once I send the assignments, if I am unable to do that on time, can I shift that to the next semester, or how is it? How is it?
Professor Sadanand is with us. Is he there, Professor Sadanand? He's not there. Do you have Professor Sadanand's number? You can
I'll,
send him a WhatsApp. It's there in the group. If you are on the
okay,
2026 group, he's
I'll
there.
do that.
He is the coordinator for this program, Migration and Diaspora.
Okay,
So you can just send him because these are administrative issues.
right.
Just send
technically
him, okay, what happens, or you can go on Google search and say, what happens if I don't submit assignments in
on
time?
such
What is
thing.
the process? I'm sure somebody in some Reddit or otherwise in Quora or somebody would have answered this question. If you don't get an answer, send a WhatsApp to Sadanand, Professor Sadanand Sahu. He'll
I'll do
answer you that.
I'll do that.
Should not be a problem.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a nice evening. I'll see you
So,
tomorrow at 12 o'clock for
yeah,
the final chapter on MDI 1.
yes, I'll be
Okay.
there.